Well, certainly if they're, a dead person who's on the rolls, we know there's 4 million dead voters on the current voting registration rolls. So this man,
just if somebody hasn't voted.
Well, if someone hasn't voted, no. I think you need to try to make that distinction, and I think it's going to court. It should be litigated there, and we'll see if you're alive and well, you should be able to vote. There's no doubt about it. But to the Democrats' point that this is voter suppression that's keeping black voters from turning out, it just doesn't bear out in the numbers. Look at Florida, where they expanded early voting days, but despite that, the black vote is still down 10% in early voting. That's not North Carolina. There's no suppression effort going on in Florida.
I'll tell you about it.
No, it's not going on in Florida. This is analogous to the claim when Donald Trump said the election's rigged. We saw the video from James O'Keefe. It's rigged. Guys said you're just saying that because you're down in the polls. Well, I think you guys are just saying this because you're down in the polls. It has to be voter suppression.
Yeah, and what I said earlier, and maybe I know we all got passionate, so maybe it was missed. I said it is certainly a factor. Since yesterday, African-American turnout in Florida has actually increased substantially today, and they expect those numbers to continue over the weekend. The only other thing that I would say to you is North Carolina is not unique with voter suppression. We saw a massive kind of effort right after Barack Obama won. In 2010, state legislatures all over this country introduced 114 measures to produce voter ID, to cut back early voting days, to make it harder. To make it harder for us to vote absentee. And so I think the reality of it is it actually is a challenge. It is more of a problem here than voter fraud, which we only see happen 0.00034% of the time.
Yeah, good points. The state and local levels of government are the ones that passed laws on elections, and there's a hodgepodge of laws out there. What I heard in your report is that the most liberal circuit, the Ninth Circuit, said that it would be inappropriate for a person who gets to vote early to have to either mail it or turn it in, that no one could come to their house and take their ballot. Why? Because the concern is you could have a blank ballot, or they could feel pressure because a certain volunteer from a certain campaign came to come get the ballot. This is why states and localities make these determinations. Voter rolls. We all know that local election officials have funding issues, and sometimes their rolls aren't in the best of order. In the 34 days I spent in Florida, we saw this firsthand. So sometimes the federal government tries to help them with resources, but we do have a problem with our data rolls. And look, I don't want anybody to be suppressed from voting who wants to vote. By the same token, there has to be integrity to our vote, especially if it's close.
At this, we do have to acknowledge, to Carl's point, that voter suppression and voter ID laws are a reality that have been pushed by the Republican Party to suppress the Democratic vote.
I believe in the voter ID
There is no question about that. In Pennsylvania, in 2012, we heard there is audio of this, of a legislator in Pennsylvania saying, this is great, we're passing this voter ID law, Mitt Romney will win in Pennsylvania.
It happened again this year.
And from the moment that I started politics, I started working for Ron Brown when he was chairman of the Democratic National Committee back in the 1990s. The DNC, Ron Brown, the NAACP, all the civil rights organizations were fighting votor suppression efforts back then.
Voter ID is not voter suppression.
It is. Let me tell you how. Because it is
Let's just move away from the circuit.
Just little history.
Okay, Carl.
It's not. It's called a modern day poll tax.
William Rehnquist, before he was the Chief Justice of the United States,
I know this story.
Back to Arizona, was in charge of something called ballot security in Arizona for the Republican Party. And it involved challenging black voters on basis of literacy. This is after literacy tests had been deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. There's some controversy over exactly what words Rehnquist used, but it has been a strategy. Since the Nixon Southern strategy evolved in the Republican Party, this has been part and parcel of how Republicans have tried to identify their constituencies.
I just reject this.
Matt.
It's unfair to call my party a racist party.
I'm not
We are the party of Abraham Lincoln.
That's true.
That is
You were the party of Abraham Lincoln.
No, that is not true. It is
It's
simply common sense to be able to say, I spent 34 days in the Florida recount. Guess what? There was just as many Republican operatives sent to Florida as there were Democratic operatives. Because when an election is close, every ballot matters. And the fact is this. We ought to have integrity to our list. And it's not racist to want to follow the local state law.
Angela, state laws that sometimes
wait one
racist,
second.
though.
Shelby versus Holder challenged the Voting Rights Act and gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. What did that do and why does that matter? States that traditionally pre-cleared, had to ensure that their laws were not discriminatory. They no longer have to go through that process. What did that result in? States like Alabama closing 7 licensing offices where black people go and go to get their licenses to follow your voter ID law, and now those offices are closed. Why? Because those black people voted majority Democratic.
David, and then we got to go.
I was just going to say, look, court after court around the country have thrown out many of these laws on the basis of the fact that they were discriminatory. I'm not calling your party racist. But that is the fact. And, you know, yes, the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln. I'm from the land of Lincoln. Jeffrey Lord is right when he says the KKK was more associated with the Democratic Party years ago, but it was the Democratic Party that passed the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Republican Party.
The Civil Rights Act was passed by Republicans in Congress.
You know that there was tons of Republican votes for the Civil Rights Act.
More than Democrats.
You signed into law my